Chapter 5. The Grotto Mage. This is an unprecedented situation. No sooner had the faculty meeting begun than Majo, the teacher for barrier techniques and a woman of about 50, made a strong declaration. Committing such acts of violence during a magic battle is beyond belief. Louis Miller must be expelled this very moment. A little under a month had passed since magic battle classes started in the intermediate course. There had been 5 classes so far, and in every single one of them, Louis Miller had caused some sort of problem. In the first, he'd won his match through physical violence, punching and kicking his fellow classmates. In the second, he'd gone up to another student and pretended to trip and fall, using his body to strike the boy as he did. According to Louis, it had been an unfortunate accident. In his third battle, he'd grabbed one opponent by their clothes and flung them at another. "I didn't punch them. Or kick them," Louis had insisted. During the fourth class, after being strictly forbidden from using physical violence against his classmates, Louis took out an opponent using a leg sweep. According to him, those didn't count. Finally, during his fifth match, Louis, after seeing a classmate cast a fireball spell, had picked up a stone at his feet and hurled it with all his might at the flame. Fireball magecraft had a special property. The fireball would explode when it made contact with something else. But Louis threw the stone so hard that not only did it blow the fireball up, it went straight through the resulting blast of air and struck a classmate in the forehead. Additionally, most of the opponents, or rather, victims, featured in these recollections were either Adolf Ferron or his underlings. Every time Louis caused a problem, Rutherford rushed in and used his smoke to restrain the boy. But Louis was, apparently, trying to find a way around that, too. He'd tried squatting and holding his breath, covering his mouth with a damp handkerchief, and all sorts of other ideas. None of them had been very effective, though. "But he's trying so hard," said Allison, arms folded in front of his chest. "The boy has ambition." "I've urged him to use magic in these battles over and over," Solo said in a hard voice. "But every time, he insists that punching his opponents is faster." Rutherford could easily imagine it. Louis, eyes clear and focused, insisting his strategy was the natural choice. As they all fell silent, Headmaster Remington folded his hands on his desk. "I've seen Miller's grades," he said. "Excellent in every subject. His practical skills are more than a cut above the rest. I hear he's already mastered beginner magecraft of every element, as well as several intermediate spells. His grades are a credit to his scholarship status." Remington directed a pacifying smile at Majo. "That said, there are obviously many issues with the way he lives his life. As his teachers, we must keep guiding him toward a better path." "Understood," said Majo reluctantly. Remington continued in a gentle tone. "Either way, we'll need to improve the barrier we use for magic battles. Problems have been pointed out to us in the past anyway. Ms. Majo, how are things progressing on that end?" As the barrier techniques instructor, Majo was responsible for maintaining various barriers, including the one used for on-campus magic battles. She let go of her displeasure at the decision regarding Louis and answered with the clarity and wisdom she was known for. "My master, the water mirror mage Sams Harason, tells me he's already devised a new magic battle barrier. Then, since our winter solstice break is coming up, let's have the water mirror mage update the barrier a little early." The mage in question was one of the greatest masters of advanced barrier techniques in the Kingdom of Riddil. The barrier at Minerva's used several formulae he'd come up with. But Sams wasn't one to sit on his laurels. He'd continued his research and had apparently developed an even better version. After giving his instructions on the new magic battle barrier, Headmaster Remington moved on to the next topic of conversation. "Now, regarding the first term's exams." About 3 months had passed since Louis' enrollment at Minerva's. By the time the first term's written exams were over, autumn had deepened, and a cold wind blew, heralding winter. Winters in central Riddil were warmer than those in his freezing cold homeland, but they were still pretty chilly. Though Louis was used to low temperatures, he nevertheless hated them. Back home, it was normal to drink spirits to warm oneself up. Poor quality liquor was even cheaper than firewood, and the storage closet he'd lived in hadn't had a heater. And so, with winter setting in, Louis began to prepare. For the last several days, he'd been stocking up on cheap alcohol and mending his clothes and boots. When he returned to the dorm with a load of bottles, his roommate Owen had been completely perplexed. But if you asked Louis, Owen's love of coffee was much more incomprehensible. After a few more days, the school posted the results of the first term's written exams. Students flooded the hallway, but they all made way when Louis arrived, so he didn't have to stand on his tiptoes to see the bulletin board. After receiving all those workbooks from Rosalie as a souvenir after summer vacation, he'd studied very hard in order to surprise her. Normally, everyone called him a delinquent or a wild child or a problem student. But Louis had purpose and a good memory. He felt confident about his performance on the exam. Let's see, he thought, looking at the posted rankings. A scowl crossed his effeminate face. Intermediate course, first year. 5th place overall. Considering that when he'd first arrived here, he couldn't even answer beginner course questions, he'd progressed by leaps and bounds. Louis couldn't bring himself to be happy about the achievement, though. Oh! Hearing a familiar voice from behind him, Louis whipped around. Rosalie was looking his way, a textbook and a sheaf of paper clutched to her chest. She glanced at the rankings, and a smile crossed her cool face. 5th place overall? Congratulations. Thanks. Rosalie didn't typically smile. Louis was happy that she was doing so now, and that she'd congratulated him. But he had a reason for being disappointed in his results. He jutted out his lower lip, then glanced sidelong at the top of the rankings. 1st place overall, Rosalie Verde. A large point gap separated her from the 2nd place student. She had an almost perfect score. Louis knew that people generally paid attention to her because of how good her grades were. But she was even more talented than he had thought. Guess you're pretty amazing, he said. Book smarts are all I have, said Rosalie, lowering her gaze to her feet at Louis's plain praise. She wasn't trying to hide embarrassment. The way she smiled, she was trying to hold something in. Louis was curious but didn't know how to ask about it. As he tried to figure out what to say, Rosalie's head quickly came back up. Oh, that's right, she said. We have winter break soon. Are you going home? Nah. Winter break in Riddle lasted from the winter solstice until the new year. Usually, people spent that time quietly with their families. Minerva's was no exception. Its winter break started a little before the solstice. Apparently, most of the students returned home during the vacation. The only ones who remained were special cases like Louis and research students keeping an eye on their experiments. Rosalie didn't pry into Louis's circumstances. Oh. Then I'll bring you some more workbooks and reference materials. Thanks. It was good to receive useful books. Back when he'd lived in Dangroats, he'd have been overjoyed. But now, his feelings were complicated. He was grateful, but dissatisfaction scratched at his chest, like something was missing. Louis groaned to himself, unable to understand his emotions. I was just in the faculty room, said Rosalie suddenly, as if remembering something. Mr. McRagan was looking for you. He says you still haven't turned in the questionnaire about your plans for the future. Oh, right. This questionnaire was an important task for first-year students in the intermediate course. It would determine what classes they took going forward. Most students responded that they wanted to continue into the advanced course, but their plans after that varied. Some wanted to work in research, others wanted to craft magical items, and still others wanted to join the Magic Corps or the Knight's Magecraft unit. In addition, a few wished to stay at Minerva's to become research students, while those from prestigious families had to return home and take over their family's title or business. 3 months after officially enrolling, Louis still didn't have a clear idea of what he wanted to do. Most of the other students were nobles who stood to inherit or had clear goals of their own. I bet Rosalie is a noble girl. She sure wasn't a commoner here on a scholarship like Louis was, that was for sure. Even disregarding her spectacular grades, he could tell her classmates and teachers treated her with courtesy. Their classroom was clearly divided between those of noble birth, those of nearly noble birth or from families with enough wealth to rival them, and everyone else. Rosalie didn't belong to any of these groups, however. She was always on her own, studying in silence. That said, she didn't stick out like Louis did, nor was she shunned as he was. She spoke with that same flat, calm tone to noble kids and commoners alike, just as she did with Louis. "Have you figured out what you want to do yet?" Louis asked her, thinking the reply would come as quickly as if he'd asked her a math problem. For some reason, though, Rosalie looked surprised. Her eyes, always so straightforward and unwavering, drifted for a moment. "I suppose if I can get into the advanced course, then, well, I'd like to do that." "With your grades? Wouldn't that be easy?" Rosalie smiled vaguely. "Get to the faculty room, okay? Don't forget," she said, then walked past him. Louis got the feeling that Rosalie was trying to be considerate toward him. She'd smiled the same way the prostitutes had whenever they told him that's something you don't need to know and gently changed the topic. "Ooh, damn it." Louis scratched his dry chestnut hair and frowned. His roommate Owen was trying his best to get into the magic corps, despite feeling guilty about his parents' struggle to pay his tuition. Rosalie studied hard enough to get the top spot on their written exams, and yet she seemed unsure of her future. And here Louis was, blessed with a full scholarship, and he hadn't given any consideration to what he wanted to do at all. He felt ashamed. "Hey, Mr. McRagan, you think I could get into the advanced course?" When he reached the faculty room, Louis stomped up to McRagan's desk. The old man was busy putting all of the student questionnaires into an envelope. "If you keep your grades up, you should be able to advance with your scholarship intact. But you need to watch your behavior a little more. I'll do my best to get rid of all the evidence." "You shouldn't be doing anything that requires getting rid of evidence. I'll put you down as wanting to progress into the advanced course, then. Have you thought about what you might like to do after that?" Louis thought for a few seconds, wondering if he should pick some random answer, then gave up. "As long as I can earn my keep, I'm fine with anything. Except maybe putting on a fake smile and bowing and scraping to some noble. I'd rather die than do that." To Louis, it didn't matter if he was a mage or not. He had been born in a remote village without any mags, and while he might find magecraft amazing, in his opinion, it was just another useful skill to have. McRagan looked at the boy from under his bushy eyebrows. "You don't have to be specific. Do you have any thoughts at all on what kind of mage you'd like to be? Or what kind of person?" "Nope. None." "Despite all you've seen of Rutherford's magecraft?" Louis couldn't help snorting. It seemed to him that all Rutherford could do was produce some tobacco smoke imbued with numbing properties. What's so good about that old rat's smoke? Wouldn't it be faster to just spread poison all over the place instead? "It seems you still aren't advanced enough to grasp its true potential." Louis's face drew back in a scowl. He said nothing. McRagan stroked his beard and ignored the problem child's dangerous gaze. "I hear you recently learned how to use defensive barriers." "Yeah. Shields and half-spheres." Barrier techniques were a different branch of magecraft from normal elemental spells. There were several categories, including defensive barriers and sealing barriers, among others. But just learning how to use a barrier gave you a leg up in magic battles. A mage could only maintain 2 spells at once. So if you could protect yourself with a barrier while attacking an enemy with offensive magecraft, you'd have a better chance of winning. However, while barriers looked simple, they were surprisingly difficult to handle. In order to put up the right barrier for the situation, you had to deploy complex magecraft formulae and weave your mana with the most delicate control. Barrier techniques were frequently compared to architecture. If you wanted to make a house, you had to do a lot of calculations in advance, then build a solid foundation for it. The house wouldn't be sturdy otherwise. Barriers were the same. Louis could only use 2 types of defensive barriers so far, one shaped like a shield, and one that formed a half-sphere around the caster. The former protected a smaller area but was tougher to get through, the latter could handle enemies from the rear, but it was weak. If I want to block that old man's smoke, I can just put up a half-sphere defensive barrier, he explained. Louis hadn't used it in a magic battle yet. He'd had to start preparing for exams right after figuring it out. What's more, the magic battlegrounds would be sealed off until the end of testing. After exams, there were still 2 weeks before the break. However, advanced course students would be holding intensive magic battle drills during that time, so the intermediate students' classes in the subject would be on pause. In other words, Louis wouldn't have another chance to battle until after winter break. But just as he was thinking about how he'd use his newly learned barrier techniques, he heard a voice from behind him. Then would you like to give it a try right now? In a magic battle? Louis turned around to find Rutherford standing there, pipe in his mouth. In his hand, as calloused from punching as Louis's own, was his mage staff. Has the new barrier been set up? McRagan asked the other teacher. Yes, not long ago. I was just thinking we should give it a test run. Rutherford lifted his staff, then tapped it against his shoulder, smirking. I'm sure you're starting to get rusty by now. I'll give you a nice warm-up, brat. You're on, old rat. This was the perfect chance to try out his new barrier technique. I'll block his smoke and give him the shock of his life. It generally required 2 mags to maintain a magic battle barrier, though the actual number depended on its scope and strength. There were simpler kinds that used magical items, but Rutherford had asked McRagan and Maga to handle the barrier for this fight. Maga loathed Louis for his bad behavior, and she kept a steady glare on him. We will now deploy the magic battle barrier, she said, her clear voice ringing. She placed a crystal ball on the ground, then began to chant. Her staff glowed white, and when she touched it to the orb, the pale blue light of the barrier expanded over their surroundings and disappeared in a flash. Feels different from the one they've been using, thought Louis. Like it's got some kind of annoying formula baked into it. He squinted his right eye and stared at the crystal ball, but he couldn't make out the magecraft formulae within. Maga removed her staff from the ball and looked up. I will explain the rules. Inside the barrier, you may only use mana-based attacks. All physical attacks will be nullified. Louis could tell how she felt about his conduct by the way she emphasized the part about physical attacks. When a combatant's mana falls below 1/10 of their full capacity, they will lose, she continued. My latest mana capacity measurement was 110, thought Louis. So I'll lose if it gets down to around 11. In magic battles, the amount of mana you had was your lifeline. You needed to spend it to use offensive magecraft, too, which gave those with greater mana capacities an advantage. How much mana could that old guy even have? Rutherford was a high mage, so he definitely had more than Louis. It might even be above 150. Louis stood about 10 paces from the teacher. Though he wanted to run up, say his foot slipped or something, and send a flying kick into the man's face, if Rutherford cast his violet smoke first, Louis would be plunging right into it. I said I could block his smoke with a half-sphere barrier just now, but that type has a lot of drawbacks. Using a half-sphere defensive barrier was like putting a big glass dome over yourself. It could deal with attacks from any direction, but it came with its own problems. It cost more mana than a shield-shaped one, wasn't as strong, and you couldn't move it around. Ready, set, go. As soon as Maga gave the signal to start the battle, Louis and Rutherford began to chant. Both were quick chanting, and they both finished at almost the exact same time. If I cast the half-sphere barrier first, I won't be able to move. I'll save it for a pinch instead. Rutherford took his pipe out of his mouth and exhaled. White smoke emerged, heading toward Louis against the wind. There it is. His so-called violet smoke. In order to combat it, Louis chose a spell that created a strong gust of wind. Not only would it drive the smoke away, it would knock his enemy off balance. Time to blow you away, old man. He thrust his staff in front of him, and a burst of wind shot from the tip, straight toward Rutherford. The wind was packed with mana. The drifting tobacco smoke was instantly dispersed, or, at least, it should have been. But the white smoke ignored the gust and continued to fly right at Louis. That wasn't all, either. When the wind hit Rutherford, He merely stood his ground, a cool look on his face. All the wind did was cause his robe to flap around. "What was that, brat? Fanning me?" "Damn you, old rat," groaned Louis as he turned and fled the smoke. The tobacco smoke had neither a long duration nor a wide area of effect. Louis knew those things firsthand from all the times it had done him in. He was surprised the gust of wind hadn't worked, but he wasn't up the creek just yet. Time for plan B. First, I'll get far enough away that he can't reach me, then I'll hit him with some attack magecraft. With a quick chant, Louis created over a dozen small fireballs, then sent them flying at the ground a little in front of Rutherford's feet. He knew the man would just block them with a barrier if Louis aimed directly at him. Instead, Louis's attack hit the ground, whipping up the dirt. And while the dirt blocked his opponent's view, Louis swiftly circled around him. "You're dead meat." Louis jumped with such force, he couldn't claim he just slipped and lashed out with his foot, delivering a wicked kick to Rutherford's temple. The tip of his worn boots connected with the man's head. But to Louis, it didn't feel like he'd actually made contact. It was a strange sensation, like all the momentum had just dispersed right before hitting Rutherford. Louis stumbled as he landed back on his feet. "What was that?" he demanded. "Weren't you listening? Physical attacks are nullified." Louis jumped backward with the speed of a wild animal, putting distance between them. But Rutherford didn't attack. It was the perfect opportunity to strike back, yet he simply pulled at his pipe, savoring the taste. This new barrier incorporates a physical attack nullification formula designed by Sam's Harason, the Water Mirror Mage. That brand of violence you're so good at won't work anymore. What? Are you kidding me? Rattled, Louis picked up a nearby stone and threw it at Rutherford. The rock was about the size of his fist, and it slammed into the teacher's cheek with clear force and intent. But once again, it was as though nothing had happened. It had no effect whatsoever. The only things that can deal damage inside this barrier are magecraft and weapons imbued with mana, explained Rutherford. Though I'm somewhat put out that I can't punch you, either. The wrinkled skin around his mouth turned up in a very intimidating smile. But I'll give you something much better instead. Louis felt a chill run down his spine. He knew his way around a brawl, and his instincts were warning him that something bad was coming. I should use a barrier, but which one? A shield or a half-sphere? The shield would hold out better, but he didn't know where the strike would come from. Speaking even more quickly than usual, he quick-chanted a spell, erecting a hemispherical barrier around himself. Rutherford used a quick chant to manipulate his usual smoke, and then, while maintaining it, he stuck his staff into the ground and began a longer chant. The smoke was meant to buy time for lengthy incantations. The real attack would be whatever the other spell was. But I can block it, thought Louis, keeping up his barrier while chanting an attack spell. Then he realized his fatal mistake. "Oh," he grunted. Macragan, who was watching from a short distance away, spoke up, his voice more carefree than it had any right to be. "You fell for it, Miller." The half-sphere barrier was like a glass dome around him. In other words, it would block his own attacks, too. Wait. I could use that other thing, remote magecraft. If he set off a spell at a distance instead of from his hands, he could attack even with his barrier up. But Louis hadn't learned remote magecraft yet. Not good, he thought, just as Rutherford finished his chant. Once it was done, the teacher began another, ritual chant. "Radiant King who sleeps on the hill of Vazelda, answer my call and display a fraction of thy might." These words were meant to show reverence to the being about to be summoned and to make that being's greatness known to others. Glowing particles of orange light gathered before Rutherford's eyes, then formed the shape of a large gate. "In the name of Gideon Rutherford, the Grotto Mage, I command this gate to open." The gate swung open, and more light flowed out from within, streaming into the ground, permeating it. "Come forth from the pit of severance, our Credo, King of the Earth Spirits." This was a spirit king summoning, one of the greatest magecraft techniques known to man. Only a select few high mags could use such spells, which called forth a fraction of a spirit king for the caster to manipulate. The ground at Louis's feet rumbled and bulged. That was when he realized something else too late. Using a hemispherical barrier was like putting a glass dome over yourself, leaving the caster defenseless against attacks from below. The ground rippled and twisted. Louis lost his balance and fell to one knee. The earth all around him swelled in little hills, which then struck upward like pillars, one of them catching him in the jaw. Grah! Normal piles of soil would be nullified by the barrier as physical attacks, but these were wreathed in powerful mana, which meant they were treated like magecraft attacks. In a magic battle, you lost mana equivalent to the damage taken, and the pillar's strike had wiped out a decent chunk of Louis. Gaia! Ah! Blech! One after another, the earthen pillars rose from the ground to strike him, beating him raw at the same time as they locked him in. They had easily shattered Louis's barrier from within. It was gone now, as if it had never even existed. In less than a minute, Louis's mana reserves ran dry, and he collapsed. The dirt pillars, extending haphazardly, had trapped him. A sudden and drastic decrease in mana gave a person symptoms akin to anemia. Most passed out, but Louis clung to consciousness with nothing but grit. Pillars sprouted from the ground, enclosing his neck from either side. He ground his teeth. "Your mistake," announced Maga in an icy voice, "was in how you used your half-sphere barrier. I'll expect a report on it, Louis Miller." Louis growled in response. Right now, he was essentially a wild animal in a cage. "You see, Rutherford used to be with the Royal Knights," explained Macragan as they disengaged the magic battle barrier. "A captain, actually. They called him the Grotto Mage, and he was rather incredible, I must say. When it came to mags specializing in combat, most people these days would think of the Magic Corps. But that group was only founded a few decades ago. Before that, the Knights Magecraft unit was more famous. If Rutherford had been a captain, it made sense that he was powerful. This old man with a bad attitude used to be a soldier. Those who can use earth-based attack magecraft are invaluable," Macragan went on. "Rutherford here was said to rival even the Roseburgs, a prestigious family of mags specializing in that element. But earth magecraft, as a whole, is mana inefficient," added Rutherford. "So, when I left the Knights, I switched to using tobacco smoke. It's much more convenient." He squatted down in front of Louis. "I almost never use the Spirit King summoning these days. It wreaks havoc on the ground, and cleanup is a pain. To bind a runt like you, my smoke is all I need." At the word runt, blue veins popped up around Louis's temple, and he dug his fingers into the dirt. He was so mad, he felt like an artery in his head might burst. But the fact remained that he was now on his hands and knees in the dirt. Rutherford tapped his pipe on Louis's head in a rhythmic beat. The magic battle's barrier was already down, so he could feel the pain and heat. "And you seem to think you can block my smoke with a barrier. You're mistaken, by the way. It can pass through them." "Wait, what?" Louis's eyes boggled. That wasn't possible. He looked over at Maga. She taught barrier techniques. The older lady nodded firmly. "Even my barriers cannot block Professor Rutherford's smoke." Maga was the best barrier user at Minerva's. If even she couldn't protect herself from the old rat's smoke, then nobody could. "To add to that," said Macragan in a relaxed tone as he stood next to Maga, "he's the only one who can use the spell to imbue smoke with mana. If you don't believe me, then give it a try. No one else has ever managed it." Spirit King summonings were always a surprise, but it wasn't as though only one person in the world could use them. And yet it turned out that the smoke Louis had always decried as cheap and uninspiring was a miracle technique nobody else could imitate. Louis looked up at Rutherford in disbelief. The man took a slow pull from his pipe, then exhaled, making a ring with the smoke. It vanished into the air within moments, unimbued. "Doing that is much more difficult for me, however," he said. At last, Louis understood. There was a gulf in ability between him and Rutherford, and it was enormous. Louis had lost completely. The day after they'd test run the new magic battle barrier, Maga sat in her research room, writing a letter. It was addressed to Sam's Haraisen, the water mirror mage and her former master. He was one of the greatest barrier users in R'dil, and the one who had developed the new barrier that nullified physical attacks. As she was writing out her appreciation for his work and for his patronage of Minerva's, she heard a knock at the door. "Come in," she called. The door opened. Standing there with a thick pile of papers was Louis Miller, the very scholarship student Rutherford had beaten to a pulp the day before. "You've finished your report?" she asked. "Yeah, and I wanted to ask you something." Maga didn't think highly of the rough-and-tumble child, but she did have her pride. She'd been a teacher for a long time, and it was her job to answer students' questions with sincerity. "Is there something you don't understand about the half-sphere barrier?" "No." "Well, yes. But I actually wanted to ask about the new magic battle barrier," he said, dropping the stack of papers in his hands onto her desk. Tiny letters filled the pages. It was the magecraft formula for the magic battle barrier, including several possible formulae for the physical nullification effect, which hadn't been made public yet. "When I kicked the old man, it didn't feel like my foot hit a brick wall, but more like the impact was being displaced somewhere else. Also, you said it nullified physical attacks, but I wanted to know more about where the line is. So I researched a bunch of formulae related to that, but none of them seemed to fit. I wanted to get your thoughts on the matter, Ms. Maga." Maga was baffled. Yes, Louis had been part of the previous day's magic battle, but he hadn't directly seen the item creating the barrier, much less the formulae. When he wrote the report, he must have thought about how he would design such a formula. But even high mags had a hard time understanding magic battle barriers, and the one from yesterday hadn't even been formally unveiled yet. Maga pushed her spectacles back up and looked over the report. It was still rough in many sections, but he grasped the essence of the matter, and he was very perceptive. Not only that, but underneath the report about the magic battle barrier was a second report about his ideas for improving the half-sphere barrier. And underneath that was a report on the duration and strength of defensive barriers in general, including ideas for how to improve existing formulae to deal with Rutherford's tobacco smoke. There were so many ideas and formulae, all packed tightly onto each sheet of paper. Things like one weakness of a half-sphere barrier is its vulnerability to attacks from the ground. What kind of formula would one need to cover the ground inside the barrier? And the Mage of Violet Smoke Gideon Rutherford's smoke couldn't be redirected with a beginner-level gust of wind. But what about an intermediate one or higher? How much directional force can he imbue into his smoke? Maga finished reading the reports. These would take a long while to correct, he'd crammed so much into them. But as she opened her mouth to tell him that, Louis spoke first, his tone uncharacteristically polite. "Ms. Maga, you teach a supplementary lecture class on barrier techniques from tomorrow until winter break, right? Let me attend it. It's meant for students who didn't get passing marks." "I know. That's okay. Please. I want to spend a little more time training so I can boost the strength and duration of my own barriers. Otherwise, I'll never be able to stand up to that old rat Rutherford." Maga put a finger to her wrinkled brow, discord raging within her. The teachers at Minerva's all had the same weakness, they couldn't resist impassioned entreaties from their students. This boy had submitted a full, complete set of reports, and now he wanted to attend her supplementary lectures. The idea rather pleased her. His behavior is still problematic, true, but if he's had a change of heart since yesterday. A teacher's mission was to guide promising students. That said, she couldn't allow him preferential treatment so easily. As she put on a reluctant expression, if only to keep up appearances, Louis brought something out of his uniform's cape. It was a bottle, somewhat large. "Please. I brought you a gift, too." Maga readjusted her crooked glasses. "And what is that?" she asked. "Alcohol." Maga lectured Louis for a full hour straight, then corrected his report and gave him permission to attend her supplementary lectures. She confiscated the alcohol, of course. From that day forth, Louis spent almost all his time in Maga's lab, researching barrier techniques from sunup to sundown. He had set his heart upon a wonderful goal: to bring down that bushy-browed old rat.